That's it! Robert Whittaker! That was unbelievable!
What a fantastic performance by the Reaper.
Robert Whittaker!
Dateline Riyadh. John Anik's already there. I can steal that line. UFC Octagon touches down in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for the first time as Robert Whittaker makes the walk in the main event for an 8th time, this time against a late change opponent, Ikram Aliskerov. Familiar faces here in your corner for UFC Fight Camp, presented by Red Rooster. He is Arda Ocal. Phil Murphy, Megan Anderson, Ian Parker, Brett Okamoto will all put you through the paces to prep you for this weekend's main event.
And there is a constant in that main event, and that man's name is Bobby Knuckles, who was supposed to take on Khamzat Chimaev, but now a new opponent. Former UFC middleweight champion Robert Whittaker will face Ikram Aliskerov instead. The 15-1 Sambo world champ is 3-0 in the UFC, all first-round stoppages. Aliskerov's lone loss was a first-round stoppage to Khamzat Chimaev in 2019 pre-UFC. He's taking a big step up against Whittaker, who responded to a loss to Dricus du Plessis with a victory over Paulo Costa in February. Whittaker said this about his new opponent this weekend, quote, "I had a pretty Chimaev-heavy game plan. Chimaev's a pretty unique fighter, and he fights in a unique way, so I worked for months leading to that, but Ikram brings a different threat to the table."
So a new threat for Rob and Aliskerov, same weapon as ever with ESPN MMA insider Brett Okamoto. Brett, how does a new, unknown, short notice opponent impact Whittaker in a fight that, frankly, he cannot afford to lose?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can answer that, and I think that you just got to give Robert Whittaker his due credit on this one. There are a lot of people out there who I don't think would have taken this fight, quite frankly. You know, they built this fight card around, quite frankly, his opponent. Obviously, Whittaker facing a guy like Khamzat who's been on the come-up, that was part of the intrigue, but really, this was about Khamzat Chimaev. Could he get through a test like Whittaker and potentially go on and fight for a championship? Well, now that intrigue is gone, and it's just Robert Whittaker essentially just taking a fight. And you know, there are some guys, we've seen this happen over the course of time, UFC fighters, they step up to the plate, but Rob Whittaker is stepping up against a guy who has 2 fights in the UFC. He is not known whatsoever. It is still a dangerous fight for him. I mean, this is just all Robert Whittaker, man. I mean, the fact that this guy can take it, and not only take it, but take it with a smile on his face and just no sweat off of his shoulders, that speaks to the man that Robert Whittaker has been his entire career and why everybody seems to really respect and love this guy.
Certainly deserves his flowers for taking this fight, like you said. We know that a win over Chimaev would have had huge implications, but what would a potential win over Aliskerov mean for Whittaker in this division?
Yeah, well, that's what's crazy about this fight, right, is that it really doesn't do anything for him. I mean, Robert Whittaker is a former champion. He is only, you know, he came up very, very short against Israel Adesanya, especially, of course, in the second fight, when it was a fight that he actually thought he won. So he's been in a tough situation for a while now in terms of trying to get a championship fight when Adesanya was the champion. And now he's got that loss to Dricus du Plessis, who is the champion. So he's in a bit of a holding pattern. So it would have been well within Robert Whittaker's right to say, you know what, this fight does absolutely nothing for me. If I beat this guy, I'm supposed to. If I don't beat this guy, then it is just a disaster for my career, but he still ends up taking it. I think what it does is it gives him a lot of goodwill with the UFC. I know that they will be very appreciative of him for not pulling out of this fight when they really need a main event in Saudi Arabia. So it keeps him in good standing in the division. It just keeps him sort of right there, relevant, but that's already where he was, right? So he's going to need some dominoes to fall his way, but that's Robert Whittaker, man. He's here to fight.
Brett, Rob is a former champ, and certainly he hopes that he has another crack at the belt ultimately. This guy's been in the UFC, though, since 2012. I mean, he debuted on a card that was headlined by George Sotiropoulos on the Gold Coast. You've been covering this sport for a long time. At what point in Rob's journey did you circle this as a name we, as fans and as those in the industry, need to know and remember?
First of all, dude, what a reference, George Sotiropoulos. I completely forgot about that guy, but what a ground game Sotiropoulos had. I think the time that I started looking at Robert Whittaker as a guy that really is going to be formidable, I think it's got to be the Jacare fight, right? It was around 2017, I want to say 2018. Rob had been a former welterweight, as we all know, and he had suffered some pretty key losses there. One of them was to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And it was kind of this thought, at least for me, it was just like, well, going up to middleweight, I don't know how that's going to benefit Rob. It's not like he's this guy who's going to go up against those middleweights and hold them down. He's not really a big wrestler, grappler kind of guy. If anything, I think he's going to have a little bit of trouble with some of the power that existed at middleweight at the time and now still does. But then Robert Whittaker moved up. He got some decision wins. But then what he did to Jacare Souza, knocking out a former Strikeforce champion, a guy that everybody had a lot of respect for. And then, of course, when he won the championship against Yoel Romero, just the cinder block that is Yoel Romero, that's when you really knew that this guy was not going to go anywhere, and that he was going to be if not a longtime champion, a guy who was going to be very, very competitive at the very top of 185 for a long time running.
Sotiropoulos, by the way, wins over Kurt Pellegrino and Joe Lozon and Joe Stevenson. No big deal. For Whittaker, though, from that person you were just mentioning to today, the fighter that he is now on that comeback trail to try and secure another middleweight championship fight, what does he bring to the table now versus the person you just described?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Whittaker has continued to add to his toolbox. I think obviously championship level experience is a big one. I mean, this guy was in a lot of championship fights. He had cards built around him. Like I said, I think that this card was mainly built around Khamzat Chimaev and the intrigue of him. But make no mistake, we all know right, Robert Whittaker was standing across from him, and that's because it would have been a very, very real test. Everybody knows just how good Robert Whittaker is, and that comes from championship fights. Lots of experience with 5 rounds against tough guys. I think he knows how to win close rounds, even though that close fight with Israel Adesanya did not go his way. I think he's a very, very smart fighter, so that's just things that come with maturity and experience. But also, he's just a happier guy. You know, everybody remembers around the time that he lost to Israel Adesanya. The first time he said that he was dealing with some darkness in his life, some personal problems with depression, and just being happier around his personal life. He seems to have really nailed that. Robert Whittaker is a joy to be around every fight week. So I think that he's just really coming into himself as a man. And when that happens, obviously you just become a better fighter for it.
Brett, fantastic context as always. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great seeing you guys. Long live George Sotiropoulos.
Well, long live George Sotiropoulos and long live the Reaper. As we look ahead to Whittaker's next appearance, we also must look at his last. A decision win over Paulo Costa at UFC 298 had its moments of bother. Megan Anderson was there, and she's here to discuss. Up next. Back here on Fight Camp, presented by Red Rooster, as Robert Whittaker's fight camp is wrapped. He's already in Saudi Arabia before this weekend's main event opposite Ikram Aliskerov. Whittaker's last fight in February, UFC 298, a 3-round co-main decision win over Paulo Costa. Now, Whittaker did eat and survive an early head kick. Otherwise, this was a striking masterclass from the former champion. Megan Anderson was there, and she chatted to Rob after his win.
Here with UFC middleweight Robert Whittaker, fresh off of a win. Last time out wasn't the decision you wanted, but this time it was. How are the emotions coming away, getting back in the win column?
Yeah, I'm on top of the world. You know, more so than winning, I got out there and I showed my heart, I showed my spirit, I showed the hunger is back in me. And yeah, I'm satisfied.
Well, you definitely put on a performance, like the jab, the leg kicks, the beating him on the inside, and the hand speed, I feel like was the big difference between you and him. He just didn't seem to figure that out. Was that kind of the game plan going into this fight, to beat him with speed? Definitely.
We understand that he's a big, powerful puncher, powerful kicker, and if you let him do what he wants, he's going to dictate the fight and bully you the entire time and just line you up and hurt you. I knew I had a speed advantage, I had pacing advantage, and I knew that the path of victory is not letting him dictate, it's dictating myself. So I went in there and I took the fight to him, and it became a fight because I knew he wasn't going anywhere. We understand how tough he is. We saw the fight he had with Romero and the fights that I had Romero, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that.
No, he's definitely a dog. He likes to drag it into the deep end, makes it a firefight. And speaking of that spinning heel kick at the end of the first round, how did you not go down? Because that landed flush.
Yeah, just brushed it off. No trouble. No trouble.
Well, when we spoke to you last, you said that you were disappointed in your fight against Dricus. You didn't turn up. You mentally were there, but your body just didn't listen. You made some adjustments. Were you able to execute those adjustments tonight?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I put a lot of pressure on myself this week. You probably heard it, a lot of my interviews, and you saw the mentality that I had walking into things and walking into the press conference. I was here for work. I was here for business. I was here to fight and bash Costa. And with all due respect, right, I just wanted that hunger. I wanted that animalistic primal nature back inside me, and I did that, and I'm satisfied. The fact that I won and the fact that I performed and that led me to victory is just the icing on top.
Well, you're currently ranked third in the division. There's only a couple people in front of you. You want the Dricus du Plessis rematch now that he's the champ?
Oh, definitely. I wanted it before he was champ. The fact that he is champ now is two birds with one stone. It lines up perfectly for me. But I think I put the entire division on watch. Like, that last fight was a bad performance by me, and I've made amends, and I've fixed some things, and I've changed some things. And mate, Rob's hasn't gone anywhere.
Absolutely love it. Know you've got a new baby daughter at home. You want to fight a couple times this year. When should we expect to see you back inside the octagon?
I want to look to mid-year for sure. You know, I want to be active. I haven't been happy with the timeline of my fights lately, just because it is what it is. Because of Costa, to be honest. That's the reason why my timeline's screwed up. But yeah, I want to go home, spend some time with my new baby girl and my kids and my wife, and then just get straight back into it. Show them, and get back to work.
So that was the last time we saw Rob. Currently, amongst those who we are still seeing fighting, Whittaker's tied with Israel Adesanya for the second most wins amongst UFC middleweights should he beat Ikram Aliskerov this weekend. He'll match Anderson Silva and Derek Brunson for third all-time. Brad Tavares ahead of him, Michael Bisping most with 16. Guys whose, prolific nature on Fight Camp, it rivals Rob's win total. Megan Anderson and Ian Parker with us now. Megan, we just saw your chat to Rob post-fight UFC 298. Whether watching live or in the time since, what were your takeaways, or are your takeaways from Whittaker beating Costa by decision?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, in his preparation, he come in and we spoke to him before this fight. He's like, listen, there was a lot of things that were going on that he should have addressed in the Dricus du Plessis fight that he did for this one. And we seen those in the fight. He was sharp, he was as fast as ever. There was a hunger and a drive that I don't think we've seen from Robert Whittaker before. And then on the backside of this, there was more of like a sense of relief. I got that he felt relieved in my interview with him after the fight. Like, he had done all these preparations, he'd made these changes. Because when you've been in the UFC for as long as he has, fighting at the level that he has, having that drive and hunger to compete at the highest level, it can start wearing on you over time. Like, finding that love for the sport can be hard over time. So I think he really made those adjustments, and I think the relief that we've seen post-fight is very much attributed to his tenaciousness, his ability to keeping on reinventing himself, and we've seen that on display against Costa.
Yeah, you know what? I think in the fight against Dricus du Plessis, with Robert Whittaker, to me, he's always a 5-round fighter. That's where he really succeeds. He's great at getting guys in the deep waters. He's got an endless gas tank. And if he does get a knockout, it's authentic, it's organic, it's within the flow of his striking. It's not forced, right? Du Plessis was someone who caught him early. It was very unorthodox. It threw Whittaker off. He didn't have the time to really collect himself, and before he knew it, it was done. Against Paulo Costa, I think that was the right matchup for him for a bounce back. Last week on my show, or a couple weeks, I said Paulo Costa has the fight IQ of a potato, and I meant it. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't have a game plan, and with someone like Whittaker, who's extremely high Q, he's the opposite of that. He looked great, minus that spinning back kick in the first round, okay? Robert Whittaker did exactly what Robert Whittaker does. He pressures, volume, he enters correctly, he does it without getting hit. Very little damage, minus that one spinning wheel kick. So when Costa was so shocked that he lost that fight, again, I question his brain activity sometimes. But for Robert Whittaker, this was a great matchup for him. He did exactly what he needed to do. And Megan, I couldn't agree with you more. That sigh of relief for someone like him now gives him an opportunity to go and keep going on that quest for another shot at the title, because the hunger looks like it's very much still there.
Well, on that quest, I mean, frankly, he cannot afford another loss, given how crowded it's getting at the top with guys who have a claim at a title shot, irrespective of what happens in Perth between Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya. Megan, you heard some points that Ian made. What were your reactions of what Rob didn't do well in that most recent loss to Dricus du Plessis, now the champ, that he has course corrected and rebounded from?
Well, much to Ian's point, Rob's fight IQ is really his strongest asset. And I don't feel like he was adequately able to put that on display against Dricus du Plessis. Dricus is a guy that is so unorthodox, and you see him when he gets inside the cage, no matter who he's up against, they can't seem to figure out the puzzle that he presents. He's so unorthodox. He's got this crazy, awkward timing. His range is very weird. It's so hard to deal with until you get in there with him. And I think that's very much what happened with Rob. And he just got caught. He caught. He wasn't able to recover. But I think him taking a step back, looking, saying, hey, I want to compete more. This isn't what I want to do. I don't want to go out putting on performances like that. And I think he looked sharper than ever. The jab, the leg kick, he was mixing everything up. And that's the beauty of Robert Whittaker. He's not one-dimensional. He can do everything. He's a jack of all trades, and he keeps getting better every single time we see him in the cage. Now, how much of him looking great against Paulo Costa was due to the part that Costa doesn't really have, high fight IQ, much to Ian's point. Ian's just dogging on him over here. But I think Rob was just really calculated, composed, and the hunger and drive and no nonsense, business-like attitude that he come into that fight week was different that we've seen in a very long time. I think that helped with his transition, getting back into the win column.
And that no-nonsense attitude, you imagine, will be an asset against a no-nonsense camp and no-nonsense fighter in Ikram Aliskerov. Whittaker himself is a former champion. As Ian mentioned, he hopes he's a future champion. Another seminal performance in the main event this weekend could go a long way towards that. But first, we look back at the best moments in the UFC career of Bobby Knuckles thus far. Where will these moments rank? Find out next.
Fighting out of Sydney, Australia, Robert Whittaker.
Champions made of this stuff.
Welcome back to UFC Fight Camp, presented by Red Rooster. Phil Arda, the Reaper, sure has had quite the career in the UFC. But Phil, through it all, it's been very entertaining.
And it's been a long road. I mean, this guy was a Tough Smashes winner in 2012. 5 years later, he's a champion. Now he's 5 years removed from losing that belt and obviously wants it back. Here's Whittaker earlier this year discussing that journey.
My achievements are like winning the show to get into the UFC was massive for me because that was my first true hurdle in mixed martial arts. And then working my way through the rankings of welterweight, but middleweight primarily, and to a championship title, and then having the belt and becoming the champion, that would definitely have to be the highlight of my career. I'm proud of the accomplishments that I've been able to achieve in my career, and just the tenure I've been able to stay in the UFC and been able to, perform at the level that I have been.
And for a guy who started his career at welterweight, and frankly, he's not a very large middleweight, to be top 5 in wins, post-fight bonuses, and significant strikes in division history, he's a former middleweight champion, but he is already a legend. And so we'll walk the road of his top 5 UFC moments thus far. Robert certainly hopes we have to update this list in the not-too-distant future. Megan threatened my well-being if I didn't put this on there. I made this list, blame me. Number 5, head kick, TKO, Mario Yamasaki looking on, and extra punishment there for Jacare. In Kansas City, this is when Rob, a big underdog in this fight, went from contender immediately to somebody who would be a title challenger.
If Megan told you to do that, why was it number 5? Well, how about this? This was a fight of the year in 2018, and it's number 4. That's how many great fights that Robert Whittaker has had on his personal list. He defeats Romero in the rematch. This was not a title fight because Romero missed weight. And Whittaker did this with a broken hand or compromised hand. in the fight. Absolutely incredible stuff.
And I got to admit, I scored that fight for Romero, but nonetheless, Whittaker, huge win, as Brett mentioned, he's a cinder block. Fighting Derek Brunson here, I chatted to Rob before this fight, first time he and I spoke, and he lit up Rod Laver Arena, finishing, again, as an underdog, Derek Brunson. Don't leave it in the hands of the judges, Rob, and at this stage in his career, he didn't. A guy who routinely was just demolishing more seasoned middleweight and climbing the ladder at 185 pounds.
April 2021, Whittaker defeats Kelvin Gastelum, unanimous decision in a shutout, 50-45 across the board. Whittaker was originally supposed to face Paulo Costa here, but Gastelum stepped in. Whittaker rocked Gastelum in the first round with a head kick, never looked back. This win set up Whittaker's last middleweight title fight.
Well, and if you were listening to the show about, 10 minutes ago or so, Brett Okamoto mentioned this, the first fight against Yoel Romero. Again, Whittaker, an underdog, he's carrying the belt on his shoulder in that headshot, but he wasn't the champion yet. This was for an interim title, UFC 213, promoted to the main event, International Fight Week, day of the fight. Under the bright lights in Vegas, Robert Whittaker shone out, picking apart Yoel Romero and becoming a champion.
Back on UFC Fight Camp, Megan Anderson returns to break down the X's and O's of Whittaker's upcoming battle with the dangerous Ikram Aliskerov, who has the advantage going into this weekend's main event.
Welcome back to UFC Fight Camp, presented by Red Rooster. We are taking a deep dive into Bobby Knuckles' continued climb. He hopes back up the middleweight ladder, a 5-round main event this weekend in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, opposite new opponent Ikram Aliskerov, making his third appearance in the UFC since gaining a UFC contract. Whittaker, his 8th main event.
Megan Anderson back with us here on UFC Fight Camp. So early in the show, we talked about Robert Whittaker. Megan saying, I was planning for Khamzat. I was game planning for Khamzat. This is a much different test. But purely from a short notice perspective, Whittaker, the established veteran, versus a relative unknown in the UFC, who would have the advantage in this situation?
Well, it's definitely going to be somebody like Robert Whittaker, who has the wealth of experience that he does inside the cage. And he's fought the top level competition, and he's been fighting them for a very long time. But big risk, big reward when you have a very relatively unknown guy in Aliskerov. He can go out there. This is his time to go out there, shock the world, and show everybody he's the real deal. He's the next big thing, and this is his time to shine. So it's really going to come down to who's able to establish their game plan, make adjustments, and I feel that really plays into Rob's favor because of his fight IQ, because of his experience, and his fight time that he's had inside the cage against top-level competition.
Well, Megan, beyond that, Rob's experience in 5-round fights, I mentioned it, his 8th main event in the UFC. Aliskerov, it's his 3rd fight, both of which 3-round fights, and you're going through his history coming out in Russia and Brave, the fight promotion in the Middle East, fought in Jordan. All of those 3-round fights. How much do you think those extra 2-round experience in that arena will help Whittaker should we get to the championship rounds here?
It definitely plays into Rob's favor, that's for sure. And trust me, preparing for 3 rounds and preparing for 5 rounds are 2 completely different beasts. Adding those extra 10 minutes, it takes a lot. When you're not prepared for it, it's pretty much you're about to find out whether you're going to sink or swim when it gets to the deep end, if it goes into those later rounds. And I think it will, because Rob's a tough guy to put away. He's very well-rounded. He's dangerous everywhere, and he thrives in these 5-round fights. He is a guy that has a ton of experience, a ton of high-level experience in these 5-round fights against top-level competition, kind of like what I've mentioned. And for Aliskerov, this is a litmus test for him. Just like, can he sink or swim with the big dogs, or does he go back to the end of the line? He's going to start his way back up again. All
right, Megan, start us off. Predictions. Aliskerov, Whittaker, this weekend, main event. Who wins, how, why?
Well, I feel like the easiest bet would be a Robert Whittaker, or easiest choice would be a Robert Whittaker by decision. But I think with the short notice 5-round fight, I'm going to pick Rob for a TKO KO in the 4th or 5th round. I think his experience will be able to tire Aliskerov out in those championship rounds for him to get the finish.
Phil, I sound really smart now because before the show I said 4th round finish for Robert Whittaker, and Megan just said that too. So lucky me, picked right. What do you got, Phil?
My concern is Rob hasn't secured a finish since, Megan, a fight you were at as a fan 7 years ago in Kansas City, head kick and punches beating Jacare. Ikram Aliskerov, we know, is going to he's not going to spam takedowns. He's a durable guy, though. He has 0 takedown attempts since winning his UFC promotion. So I'm liking Rob. I'm backing Rob with this. I go back and forth, though, between do I think it's going to be a finish or a decision. Just knowing Rob, that he hasn't gotten a decision in more than 7 years, I got to go 5-round, 49-46 type, comfortable decision win, another showcase. And again, you see that time on screen, 5 a.m. start time. That is the main card. So Whittaker will be making their walk sometime around 7 or 7:30 a.m. if you're watching in Sydney and Melbourne.
Yeah, so enjoy that main event this weekend. Whittaker looking to inch closer to a middleweight title fight once again against Ikram Aliskerov. Phil, it should be exciting.
I hate that he's somewhat punished for Khamzat Chimaev getting bounced off this card, but if he puts on a performance like we're seeing here against Bohachinia, nobody will be able to make the case that he is ill-deserving of getting the winner of Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya at UFC 305. Thank you so much for joining us on Fight Camp.